We're joined by John Sitilides, geopolitical strategist with Trilogy Advisors. John, two of the bombers were members of a prominent family, others described as middle class or upper middle class. Does that fit the typical profile of a radicalized suicide bomber?
It very much does. If we look back at the history of radical Islamist terrorism over the last several decades, we do suffer occasionally from this fallacy that these are underprivileged or undereducated individuals. Many of them turn out to be extraordinarily well-educated and even affluent, whether it's doctors, engineers, architects, and the like. Because what we fail to realize, I think, in the United States and more broadly in the West, is there really is a religious radicalization that takes place here. And so income and education and other class strata don't play a role here. If the religious fanaticism is powerful enough, it can transform even the most wonderful people in the most vicious of killers.
John, dozens of people have been arrested at this point, and the American ambassador is warning that there is a threat of ongoing terrorist plots. How extensive is this network in Sri Lanka that we're talking about?
I think we'll have a better idea in the days ahead. Right now, all indications seem to be that the Islamic State is responsible for carrying out this multi-pronged attack. And it was clear it was not simply going to be a local organization that had done anything like this. First of all, the Christians of Sri Lanka have never been targeted in this way in the past. And so what you have is, first of all, al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda, several years ago announcing that al-Qaeda was going to be moving eastward and establishing al-Qaeda on the Indian subcontinent, and whether Islamic State found a vacuum to fill in the area as well and saw a terrific opportunity to strike at Christian communities in Sri Lanka in this particular instance. But I think we're in for much more concern, not only in Sri Lanka, but in other parts of South Asia and perhaps into the Philippines and Indonesia and the South China Sea. Islamic State may be down in Syria and northern Iraq, but they are popping up as a very dangerous Islamist radical group in many other parts of the world. I think we'll be dealing with this for some time to come.
John, I want to get more information on that in just a moment. But first, what's the likelihood, in your opinion, that there are more would-be bombers out there in this plot who have yet to be arrested? Are more attacks still possible?
I don't know if more attacks are possible. They may have planned, but usually they look to strike in a coordinated fashion the way they very successfully and tragically and atrociously were able to accomplish on Easter Sunday. Probably there are many more operatives that are connected to this network that are still to be apprehended. But my sense right now is that Sri Lankan authorities, having passed through this horrific experience, have clamped down severely enough so that there won't be any further attacks. But there are many more people to capture and hopefully excellent intelligence to extract from these individuals, not only to prevent further attacks in Sri Lanka, but to try to attack this Islamic State network throughout the South Asian subcontinent.
As we just heard, Sri Lanka's president is asking those two top officials, the defense secretary and the national police chief, to resign. Was there really a breakdown in communication, or do you think this was just a failure to act?
Well, there may be one of three possibilities. One is, we have this political rivalry between the president of Sri Lanka and the prime minister that may have led to a complete breakdown in communications at the uppermost levels of national security. We may have had sheer incompetence on the part of intelligence officials inside the country, and we may have also simply had bureaucratic silos, the way, unfortunately, we learned we had here in the United States on September 10th, 2001. So again, it's only been several days. The country is still in a state of shock and emergency, but I think in the days and weeks ahead, a clearer pattern will emerge as to what went wrong, how to prevent this from taking place in Sri Lanka, and ideally using that information to help other governments prevent these types of catastrophic terror attacks from taking place on their soil.
John, just to build on what you were just saying, in Sri Lanka, we know, it seems almost conclusively, that it wasn't for a lack of intel. The intel was there. So was it a lack of leadership? Was it because of the infighting in the government?
Again, with clarity, it's difficult to tell right now. We do know that the government of India had provided intelligence to the Sri Lanka authorities around April 4th. Around April 11th, reports indicate that the police chief had warned that some type of attacks were imminent, although they weren't clear what the nature of those attacks would be or on what date. But even as far back as 3 years ago, it turns out that the Muslim community of Sri Lanka had begun to indicate warnings. They were very much concerned about this nascent group that most of us have never heard of before and the kind of radicalization that was taking place. So the information goes back at least 3 years. With these specific attacks, about the last 2.5 to 3 weeks, it could be a combination of incompetence on the part of individuals, a very untimely political rivalry between the president and the prime minister, and sheer bureaucratic inefficiency that led to these horrible, horrible murders.
All right, John Sitilides, thank you very much. And we will be back with you a little bit later in the show.